Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the War Report. And oh boy, has it been quite a week in Syria. Now, I'll start with the bigger news in Syria. Let me just make the map a little bigger. Hope you guys can see that. There we go. I think that's probably the best we're gonna get. But as usual, Deir ez-Zor is the hotspot. Idlib has calmed down, which believe me, we will get into some of the shenanigans with Idlib and whatnot. But ISIS attacks just out of nowhere. It's so strange how these brutal terrorists that we defeated just resurged out of nowhere. Now, if you believe the mainstream media, this is because Trump foolishly withdrew our troops, which we all know Trump fulfilled his promise of getting American forces out of Syria. Well, look, we're big Trump supporters here. MAGA, COG, whatever. He's really doing the people's work, putting America first in our foreign policy by getting our troops out of Syria. But unfortunately, neoconservatives are right, and ISIS out of nowhere in eastern Syria and Deir ez-Zor. Now, of course, we all know American troops are in Syria, but not in Deir ez-Zor. Not close to Deir ez-Zor, at least up until recently. You can see actually coalition forces near the yellow oil fields. No surprise there. Were in a firefight with ICE forces. I believe they were shelling them. So that's happening. Syrian forces and Syrian-backed militias were also confronting ISIS forces in the area. And a new ISIS tactic, which I don't know whether this is something they've always done, and I'm just realizing it because it's researched in the news, but assassinating Syrian intelligence officers seems to be their strategy for the
Hmm.
resurgence. I've heard. I think this is
Yeah,
like the second or third time I've heard of this just today. Um,
it's the second in the last 2 weeks,
yeah.
which makes me think that they're receiving excellent intel
No.
on where the.
It must be Iran. Who else? But yes, it
It's
is as
totally
if they're
not
receiving
totally
out.
not the U.S. or Israel.
Oh, absolutely not, and definitely not Turkey either. No.
They wouldn't do that.
Never. That coalition we just described would only fight for liberalism and democracy in the Middle East, and to spread democratic values. I couldn't imagine anything else. But they must be getting intelligence from a nefarious source. We'll leave it at that. We'll leave you to speculate on that. But
Yeah,
it is interesting that um, I don't know. It seems like ISIS is playing things a bit smarter than they did 5, 6 years ago, where their attacks are more targeted. Now they controlled swaths of the Middle East at that point, but that's no thanks to the instability or anything. But it is interesting watching these new tactics as it's almost as if they're adopting Kurdish tactics. Well, you're recalled in Afrin in northern Syria during the Turkish occupation, they would target high-ranking officials. Now, this is no new strategy. This is no novel strategy. It's been done for uh, longer than any of us have been alive. I can tell you that. But it seems like this is a new strategy, at least for them, and I would say most notably, the strategy had been employed by the Kurds, like I said. Now, make whatever connections you will with that. Again, I'll leave you to speculate.
yeah. It seems you know, of course, there are problems in Syria with regards to Idlib. Um, there seems to be like a very short circuit from Sarakib to the next town and back again as the only fulfillment of the peace agreement that was reached in February of this year to open up Highway 4. Um, the other, so there's flashpoints around that, but mostly it involves protesters that initially were working with Hayat al-Sham in order to block Turkish and Russian patrols. However, and I'm going to presume these are a different set of rebels or a different polity within Idlib who want to open up, who want a road closed that goes to greater Aleppo and Aleppo city. Al-Sham actually moved in today and actually broke up the protests, shot some of the protesters. So far, no dead, but some wounded. So is this the case of al-Sham beginning to work with Turkey and Russia? That's interesting. I don't know like what's going on with Highway 4. I don't know why they've chosen this other road further north in the country that connects with Aleppo. But this is another layer of complexity. Also, because Al Sham has gone back and forth, shelling with Turkish troops, and normally Turkish troops absolutely protect Al Sham, along with some of the other radical groups within Idlib. Um, so Idlib is becoming more and more complicated, and I think the reason for that is some kind of a solution, some kind of soft power solution, seems to be like the only possible solution. And you have people within Idlib that want to have some kind of gainful um, trade with the greater part of Syria, particularly with Aleppo, but I'm sure with other provinces and cities within Syria. And they want a return of some kind of normalcy. And of course, there's other ones who are afraid that doing so will weaken the resolve, that it will only embolden Syria. Which leads me to believe, of course, that the most extreme radicals in Idlib are being funded by somebody. Otherwise, they literally couldn't afford to make this move.
Like I
Idlib,
said, the Iranians.
even greater, Idlib is such a tiny state. There's no way that they can survive this long with a near complete breakdown of infrastructure. And like, what are they trading? What are they like? I mean, they might be in an autarkic state that can completely provide for itself, but I have doubts about that. Um, Being as small as it is, and landlocked no less. So, but there are other parts. About 2 days ago, there was an explosion, another one in Afrin. We've been noticing that there's more and more action happening in Afrin. This time a blast went off. It killed 39 people and wounded another 50. I haven't seen any reports on it since. So, there could have been people who succumbed to their injuries. But this is easily the largest attack that has ever happened in Afrin so far. And these attacks started happening about 3 weeks ago. Another U.S. convoy. This is the eighth time in about 4 weeks that a U.S. convoy was forced to turn back or retreat or whatever you want to call it in the northern part, the predominantly Kurdish held part of Syria, although much of that zone is a combination of Kurdish and Syrian army troops working together. And even the Syrian army has been involved in some of these moments where the U.S. forces have been forced to turn back. So, yeah, that said, most of the action, most of the fighting has been happening in Deir ez-Zor. And I'm wondering, like, if that isn't really just a distraction, a way to spread Assad's forces far and wide, because we're seeing provocations coming out of Idlib radicals fighting against Syria. So, because I personally don't know, I know that Deir ez-Zor was one of the places, because it's close to the Iraqi border and it's close to the area where ISIS initially started, that there's some support for ISIS in that area.
Yeah,
But I don't
and
know if that area, besides just ideological support, what economic support there is, because they no longer run the oil fields there anymore as they used to.
yeah, and yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, so any economic support, especially with the loss of the oil fields, probably coming from an outside source, as we hinted earlier. And you mentioned about Assad's troops being spread thin. It's interesting that you mentioned that because a lot of the forces fighting against ISIS in Deir ez-Zor are actually militia groups. I think it was actually, according to the reports from LiveMap, Hezbollah forces were engaging them in the area. So you
Yeah.
can see where it's spread thin, where they want the army proper in Idlib to actually confront this last stronghold, whereas they're sending the militia groups and the pro-government paramilitary groups to fight with the resurgent ISIS, which it makes sense. I can see why they do that, but if they didn't have to, they would have every available man, no matter whether he was Syrian military proper, Hezbollah, some other militia, on the border of Idlib. So that shows that yeah, something else is going on here, because if not, they would all be focusing on that main objective. Every available one would be focusing on that main objective.
Yeah, which is why it makes me think that eventually will have to be uh, some kind of a push, some kind of a spark that will alight in Idlib. And I'm guessing the warmer the weather, the more likelihood of that.
Yeah.
Of course, at the moment, that would also mean a triggering of refugees, and we've seen the EU reject refugees, and that did coincide with COVID, but it coincided when COVID didn't seem like such a threat. There were several European countries at that time that weren't even in quarantine mode. So I would still say that the issue was more or less in isolation, dealt with regards to a migrant and refugee crisis flaring up again in Europe as it so did in 2015 and early 2016. I don't think, my guess is COVID was not as big a concern as some people have tried to make it.
Yeah, I view it as more of a straw that broke the camel's back for a lot of situations, whether that be migrants, whether that be the economy, whether that be a myriad of things. It's just that last thing that pushed over the edge.
I mean,
not
it was
necessarily
early in mid-February, right? It was early in mid-February, and they were Blumf at that time was just saying it's just the flu. Johnson, maybe didn't come out and say it, but he was going to do herd immunity, and it was all going to be basically there were several countries. But, as Italy started to really deteriorate and the numbers kept increasing. But, yeah, I agree with you. I think it's the straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah, and now I figured with Syria, the big story coming out of it is... Now, this is from Bloomberg, so a large Western media spin on it. Now,
Yeah.
I need to read the exact headline because I don't think I can do it justice with just a summary of the headline. Putin has a Syria headache, and the Kremlin is blaming Assad. Now, as it goes on, it starts saying, Russian media outlets, pro-Russian media outlets, are running pieces talking about Putin's frustration in Syria, and they're laying the blame on Assad, and they're saying, well, there could be somebody waiting in the wings to take power instead of him. Somebody in the Baathist party or an opposition member. So, a lot of, funny enough, as you brought to my attention, which I'll hand this over to you in a second, a lot of gaslighting, both from the Western media and even from the Russian government when it comes to this. And it's, now, just in brief, I'll let you get into detail about it. What it reads as, when you actually read the article, not just the headline, it's that Russia's becoming frustrated for a myriad of different reasons, not even related to Syria, just the economic downturns, the oil prices, and the entire global crisis going on right now. So, all that weight, and then again, this is also a straw that broke the camel's back kind of moment, where every side in Syria, whether that be the Assad government, whether that be the opposition, whether that be the Kurds, whether that be ISIS, everyone is so trenched in their propaganda and their own interests that nobody can afford to back down right now without losing all credibility. If the Kurds say they want to compromise again, they're going to lose credibility. If Assad backs down on the every-inch rhetoric, he's going to lose credibility. If the Idlib and ISIS types stop saying we must jihad and establish the Syrian caliphate, they're going to completely collapse in on themselves. So this article is a very narrow view, but it has a kernel of truth in it.
Right. So the reason I particularly think this is a kind of gaslighting that's taking place is because it's not that Putin isn't frustrated with Syria in general. It's that he's frustrated basically with Americans getting away with not having to cut back in production. Although, we'll get into it later, oil has rebounded to $15 a barrel.
Woo!
Right, and then May 24th, the Saudis are coming for their second round after 6 days ago of something like 50 or 63 million barrels. They don't know where they're going to park them. They don't know how they're going to upload them. In any case, so I think definitely Putin is frustrated with dealing with COVID, frustrated with Syria still not resolved, frustrated with Highway 4 linking Latakia to Aleppo, and it could be coming crunch time right now. But the gaslighting part in particular, I would say, is really foreshadowing again a flare up in Idlib, right? Because if Idlib flares up, Syria will have to retaliate, and Putin can, play the part of I'm just here to stabilize the country so that you guys can find a political solution, which was Russia's position from the start. But the truth is, Russia has an air base, a military air base, and a military port, and they cannot afford to lose them.
And just port for trade alone, so it's military and
Yeah.
economic. And that again, as you said, that's Russia's major goal in Syria. You could see this is also their major goal because they have leased a port out of Cyprus. They are warming up to Lebanon. They're in talks with Egypt. Now, in the latter two, they haven't made any progress in securing any port or any similar deal to lease a port. But point being is, they're kind of keeping those as like a plan B, C, and D, as it were.
Right. So I guess what I'm saying is that the article overemphasizes Putin's frustration with Assad. It's not that there probably haven't been any flare-ups, and we should mention that Peskov, one of his ministers who routinely does, the public interaction, has denied that. This could be a roundabout way of telling Assad to maybe find a solution, but the fact is there is no one waiting in the wings. Syria is not resolved, and it might be something that's irresolvable. And it's not just because of what Assad wants. There are things that Russia wants. There are things that, some of the Arab countries have been brought around, like United Arab Emirates opened up their embassy again in Damascus in 2018. So that was like 2 years ago. They've opened up commercial trade with Syria. They are interested in some kind of a peace deal there. Of course, Israel isn't, and in a very sort of impassioned way. And of course, if Israel isn't interested in it, neither will America. And of course, Turkey isn't, but for different reasons. So I don't buy this idea that Putin's going to lose his nerve with Assad. Assad better come up with something. Come up with what? You're going to have a part of the territory ceded to the Turks, another one to the Takfiris, another one to whoever. What, you're going to let Israel have more than the Golan Heights? It's preposterous. Now, if it's not gaslighting, then it's basically saying, it's signaling that a major conflict is coming and Russia is probably going to limit its actions, which could have, not a very good outcome for Assad and tangentially for Russia's interests there. That's what it could mean.
Yeah.
The other thing I think that has to be looked at is COVID is doing a number on the Russian economy as well, as it's doing in most major countries. So there's been several articles, about Russian businessmen. These aren't the oligarchs. These are businesses and chains that are not happy with the bailout package so far from the Russian government. So I would say that this is a certain kind of gaslighting. I don't buy it, not because I have some kind of romanticized idea about Putin and Assad's relationship, cue in the magenta purple colors
soon.
video.
Soon.
Yeah, soon. Yeah. I don't. I'm just saying that Russia can't just like it's not going to leave Syria. It has a base there, and it has a valid interest in the stability of that country.
Yeah, and a lot of the
It
frustration,
cannot afford to.
a lot of the frustration.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
go ahead.
Yeah, a lot of frustration, even according to the article, was that Russian businesses want to set up shop in Syria, but it can't be done until the war is pretty much brought to a close. Now, that's of course not entirely, but it has to be calmer than it even is now.
Right. Exactly. So Russia can't risk, like, you know what, we'll just like we'll let the dogs take Syria, and at least we've got Crimea, y'all. Like that's not tenable. Like Russia can't project its power. It can't even like remain Russia without those two ports. Like like it's not like if Russia just didn't have Crimea and it didn't have a base in Syria, Russia would be like a normal country, which would mean what? Like not sovereign,
Gay.
basically, and gay.
I mean, yeah,
So
and like I said, even a permanent port in Cyprus would be a game changer. Like, yeah, they have their leased one now, but like they don't have like a Russian-owned one. But if that were the case, they may be able to let Syria slip and may be able to leave it to its own devices, which again I still think would be bad for them. But they could afford that loss. But they have no other Mediterranean port as of now, and pretty much to go back to what you were saying is I agree with you. This is either A, telling Syria to stop doing something, or B, telling them not to do something.
right, but what's Syria doing at the moment? It's not doing anything. So all we
Exactly.
can
So
talk about.
I lean
So the
towards
gaslighting is about the future.
yeah I lean towards
It's
B in
about
that
about a
case.
future action.
Yeah, I view it as more of a gaslighting, a warning, like do not do this. Rather than stop doing this, which it reads as stop doing this, but when you read between the lines and actually read beyond the headline first paragraph, you start to see that.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that covers Syria.
Yeah, that's all I've got for now.
Yeah, so very very odd situation considering the fact like I don't know this ebbs and flows. One episode we talk about it seems like the war is going to be over within weeks, but now it seems like all of that has fallen apart. But I mean, who knows what next week will hold? Maybe a statue of Assad will be erected in Idlib by the time we record this episode next week. Now, I'm not counting on that, but I've seen crazier things happen. So let's visit our I don't know. I guess you could say our second favorite European politician. Macron has done it again.
Yeah,
He
my boy.
it's funny. I was talking to somebody else last night, and I made this point. Macron, ideologically, he's no different than many neoliberals beyond the fact he's a bit more pragmatic. He'll shut down immigration when he has to. He'll give some concessions when it comes to social spending or whatever. But just in his effort to dethrone Germany as the head of the EU and make it into France, he's willing to throw the whole thing into chaos, which you gotta love the guy for it. Now,
Yeah,
his
he's
most
a madman.
yeah, he is. Now, his most recent ones, this comes from two articles, one from the Telegraph, one from let's see, that this is just like a French news outlet. So the first one is Macron urges European solidarity to help Italy and Spain during the COVID crisis, and the other one is Macron issues ultimatum to Europe's German bloc, which is Germany, Austria, and Netherlands, the rich countries of the EU, if you will, telling them to cough up COVID trillions or lose the single market. So he's doing some real hardball negotiations where you're going to bail out Southern Europe, you're going to help us, you're going to put me on top of the European Union is in a roundabout way what he's demanding. That's pretty much what all his demands boil down to. Or you can kiss the single market goodbye. No more euro, no more of these ridiculously open trade agreements. So I don't know. The man is willing to risk a lot for, I would say, what is kind of an unclear goal. Now, he's really been playing nice with Spain and Italy, and not only to their governments, but to the populist oppositions there. Like, he echoes their talking points, which is funny because you'll recall around this time last year, he was denouncing them. He was saying, "Oh, you're so awful," and that led to actually a bit of a war of words between him and Salvini, which led to well, I don't get protested by these massive crowds. Look at you, Macron. And I don't know. It seems like he's young enough. Which again, I was going over this with you in our messages about the theory how Macron can conceivably become a monarch and restore monarchy in Europe. But I will save that for a different day. It doesn't really
Dude.
fit in here. But I think he's young enough. He's actually kind of inexperienced enough where he kind of learns as he goes on. He doesn't have this lifetime of, I would say, bureaucratic indoctrination where it has to be done this way and like that. Like, he comes from that background, but he still got elected relatively young. So he can still think outside the box, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, like as we've witnessed for a few years now, Macron is willing to take gambles. Like he does read the situation very well. He might even be reading dissident right literature. No,
Yeah, we said
he
Putin listens
doesn't
to
have
the War
to
Report.
figure it out.
Macron listens to the War Report.
He's listening. He's listening to us. So so you're right. Now, what could France possibly offer in comparison to Germany? Well, what Macron is betting on is a kind of spiritual leadership, because the more technocratic and economic and industrial leadership of Germany isn't. It's not unifying Europe. It's not. I mean, it goes both ways. Of course, there's envy. Of course, there's also resentment.
There's German autism, where they must micromanage every aspect of any country they're in a treaty with.
Yeah, and there's also like the feeling that the southern countries are just ripping them off, and why are we always bailing them out? But I think what Macron is offering is kind of like he is offering. Now, it's kind of like a trust the plan, simply because what he's asking is, you don't need to see the plan. You need to pay attention to me. I can guide you forward. Now, this has been the beginning of disasters for many a politician, and I'm not saying it won't be.
But also
for
many
Macron.
successes, mind you.
Yes, and this is what I mean. He's willing to take gambles, and so he's gambling that he has hit the nerve that like there is a as far as from a political point of view. So I don't. This is not with a capital S, but there is a spiritual problem in the EU with regards to unity, and I think he is right in that none of these countries are going to be stronger if they disband. And what he's basically saying is like, if you don't try extra hard, we're going to lose this whole thing. And I'm not waiting to find out how that rolls out. Like, France is going to leave first if you don't. That's what he's threatening, right? He's basically saying you have an obligation, and that obligation doesn't rest on it. Like, as we're in the EU as long as there's like sunshine outside. So in that sense, he is saying that there is a spiritual problem, an ideological problem, fundamental in the EU, and he is right about that. Of course, we can make fun of him and fault him for all kinds of things, but he's not wrong.
Yeah.
So, and he is bold. He's literally the boldest politician in Europe right now.
Well,
that
it's funny.
includes.
I was talking to somebody last night, and I pretty much said, I would have never thought I would live to see a world where Macron out-Trump Trumps.
Yeah.
Yeah,
like he's doing first plan better than Trump.
Yeah, like he is more Trump than Trump is. He's willing to throw established institutions into chaos for his own goals or his country's own goals, which, again, the line gets a bit blurred when it comes to those kind of things. He's willing to talk a bit game. He's willing to talk to unconventional partners, Russia and China, and even again, Middle Eastern countries, Iran. I mean, he met with the Iranian foreign minister. The name escapes me right now, but again, he's willing to do all these out-of-box things. He's willing to establish some economic union in Africa. Now, that was a pre-existing French project, but he's really built on that with with sort of trying to establish a neo-colonial agenda in Africa. He gets into spats with Bolsonaro in Brazil. Again, he is probably the most wild card politician. I don't know, maybe Erdogan beats him out, but I mean, again, Erdogan's kind of hard to beat in that regard. But he'll talk to Orban. You'll recall, I think it was Business Insider, one of these outlets, saying, "Oh, look, they're the frenemies that are shaking up European unity." Again, you'll see all these things come from this man, and you almost have to admire him And you also have to appreciate from the point of view that, look, ideologically, in his mind, he may not agree with us, but what he's doing is serving our interests. And on top of all this, ignoring NATO and American involvement in Europe, France is the top dog in Europe when it comes to military capabilities. They have nukes.
Yeah.
They have one of the largest standing armies, most military equipment, tanks, missiles, all that kind of stuff. They outrank Germany. They outrank the UK at this point. Definitely any of the other European powers. And I mean, look, now of course Russia outdoes them, but again, Russia is second behind the United States in theoretical military power, raw on paper. How that would actually play out in conflict, again, we've been over this a million times. These things always don't always work out like they do in theory, but the point stands. I think they're ranked like fifth in terms of military power, but
Yeah.
the man.
And it's very sophisticated weaponry too.
Oh yes, they're one of the
Like everything from their rifles to their tanks to their missile systems, even the non-nuclear. Yeah, some of them, like their Raptors, their fighters, jet fighters, are joint missions, but they always tweak their planes their own particular way. I think the Rafael. I think that's their own.
Yeah, they're actually up there in military exports, up there with the U.S. and Russia.
Yeah. It's a capable country. Yeah. No, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, it's fine. A capable country whose head of state is also technically the Prince of Andorra. Just keep that in mind. I'll elaborate that on in another episode. But I mean, okay, Macron is the closest thing you have to a monarch running a European country. Not just Macron, the French president in general. Which I don't know. You kind of gotta appreciate a little bit of the irony, French Revolution, and everything. But again, point being is, France is a major player in Europe. They're probably the country in the European Union that can throw the whole thing in a tailspin. Now, whether that be for the sake of destroying the European Union or restructuring it, we all know that Macron is out to restructure it. Again, it's an interesting question. And I think I don't know, I don't want to know whether to use the word funny, ironic, but the thing about Macron that I really just can't get over in terms of, again, the sort of irony of it is when he got elected, he was supposed to be the counterbalance to Trump. He was the return to normalcy for the Western world, the new leader of the free world after they tried and failed to hype up Merkel as that. And he's a centrist liberal, and he comes from an established background in finance and law and politics. And then again, he's more of a wild card than any Western politician in power right now, in the seat of a head of state or head of government. Because again, I think there's more wild, like some of the more anti-establishment politicians, like Salvini, like the Vox Party, like some of the people in the ADF. I would say they're a bit more wild cards. But I would say, European leader beyond Orban, any European leader that actually has weight to throw around, I'll say. It's Macron, which
I think most people did not dial into the equation his ambition.
Oh, absolutely.
Because a lot of this is just it's ambition. He's got from. I really should read up more on him. Instead, I sort of he's always on my periphery. I don't know, how detailed any of his proposals are. And that might be one of the reasons why Germany has not really responded in kind, since he's been in power, since he's gone this direction. It should be said miraculously.
Yeah, which was around the time of the Yellow Vests, like late 2018, early 2019. He really, I don't know, like, in terms of domestic policy, that really whipped him in the shape with some immigration stuff, some social issues, some economic issues. But in terms of his foreign policy, I think he was just waiting for the right moment.
Yeah, he's his hunches are right, and I think what he's probably revealing right now, because of his pragmatism, is a kind of a settlement. And I think this is one of the things that has maybe Germany and the other countries, for it's not the single reason, but it might be why they're dragging their steps, so to speak. And this is what he's offering pragmatically is, I don't want to say a reset, but a kind of honest assessment about where Europe is right now and where the EU is right now, and what do they have to do to stay afloat. I think he sees disaster on the horizon better than they do.
Yeah, I think he sees the hubris of the German bloc. He sees Brexit. He sees the
And
shakeup with Trump and the rising power of Russia and China. He's looking at it like, do we want the European Union to be a player on this new world stage, or do we want to be subservient to, I don't know, probably primarily the United States, you'd think of, but to any other foreign power?
right, and so this is so what he's doing basically is in a roundabout way. He's kind of revealing what were the long range plans. I've often said that the long range plan from 2011 was that Syria would be toppled the way Libya did, and then 4 years later, Russia would lose Crimea, and that would have been the path. That's how things would have developed. And I think what Macron is saying is basically, I don't think that's going to happen. 8 years later, China is not weaker, it's stronger. It's more assertive in the Pacific than it's been. And its ties to Russia are far deeper than they were 9-10 years ago. And of course, there's no NATO base in Crimea. And Assad is still in power. And it's not so much about Assad at this point, because Russia is not going to...
Libya's even starting to resemble some stability. Now, it's far from, but compared to what they wanted, compared to 2014, 2015, it looks like a first world country.
Yeah. So I would say his pragmatism has kind of revealed what like the failure of Plan A, and he's basically, just admitting what the actual situation on the ground is and how to go forward, because everything from like demographic disparity, economic disparity, especially after COVID, and especially after Brexit, is like, in all likelihood, it will topple the EU inside of 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, the Italian sentiments against the EU were at an all-time high. I think actually they broke a majority of people saying they would be open to some sort of referendum and they would actually be in favor of leaving. I mean, the EU completely dropped the ball with Italy. They completely abandoned it. Russia and China picked up the slack, I would say, in terms of amount of aid China picked up the slack, in terms of effective aid Russia picked up the slack. But again, that's getting into like just really like details that again, for a topic we're not discussing right now. But point being is they abandoned the third largest economy in the union to to assistance from outside powers. They neither Germany nor France, the number 2, number 1 respectively. Germany's number 1, France number 2. But point stands, the top 2 countries in the union didn't step in to help the third player. What makes them think they'd step in to help any of these Eastern European countries, not any of these other Balkan or Southern European countries? But I almost guarantee you, once if there's a massive outbreak in Ukraine, Germany will be the first there to secure their the health of their farmers, as it were. But I mean, you have that, and I think, again, what you get with Macron, somebody who's willing to take a step back, look at it honestly. Now, again, I want to clarify that we don't see him as some secret, monarchist or reactionary or any out there ideology or any out there sort of figure. But I do see him as a foot in the door for somebody who is a bit more sympathetic to our ideas, to take power in France, take power in Europe, and to really use his strategy, use what he had done already to continue shaking things up. And I'm not even saying that, I want the current European order to stay around. I'm not saying I want the European Union to stay around, or that the European Union can be hijacked and turned into this right-wing organization that stands against liberalism for traditional European values. I'm under no illusion of that, but I do think it can be a stepping stone towards a system that may resemble that.
Well, I mean, I think there's a sense that the heydays are over.
Yes, exactly.
And that usually means kind of like bad news for some of liberalism's domestic social policies, let's say. But is Macron a Romanov? or is Macron the ultimate liberal? He doesn't believe in anything, nothing more than money. And I think so. He is ultimately very pragmatic, but that isn't to say he doesn't have a vision. And his vision is based on a more honest assessment than what, let's say the more international elite powers have, as a plan for Europe, for before the end of the 21st century.
Yeah.
I think he succeeds that, Russia hasn't been toppled, and we're going to have to work with them, and so on. And of course, as America's attention is going to be more and more diverted towards China, this presents an opportunity for Macron, but it also represents an opportunity for the Russians. Expect Eastern European countries like Poland, Lithuania, Ukraine, and even Belarus for all kinds of machinations, for all kinds of panic setting in about what is Russia going to do. So, yeah, Macron is he's got an honest assessment. I haven't seen the plans, but and he is asking people. But he is the only one actually making kind of any sense, because as much as the majority of Italians now after COVID want out of the EU, the truth is, if they knew how painful that would be, they probably wouldn't.
Yeah, I think Brexit, again, I think the British served as a bit of somebody who they clapped in the stocks, made an example of, this is what we're going to do to you if you try to leave the EU. And then an economy like the British versus an economy like the Italians, it's going to be much harder on a country like Italy if they do try to to revolt, as it were. So I think, again, they'll stay in, they'll take their wounds, but they'll seek aid and assistance and partnership from outside powers. Again, like we've seen with China and Russia, probably the United States, and probably, again, with France turning over a new leaf, I guess you could say, with that. And, the final point I'll make about Macron is we'll know where he really stands if the following happens. Okay, so as we laid out, he of course is the Prince of Andorra, as is a title conferred upon him as French president, which means realistically, I mean, he's part of a royal family. He's a monarch, technically. He can divorce his wife. Any young European royalty he could have. If he finds one, he could just marry her. He's still young enough to produce several children, which he can again marry off, and he could establish a pan-European monarchy. Now, is Macron my ideal candidate for that? No. Is he likely to do that? Probably not. If he did do that, I would consider him the greatest leader of this era, even greater than Putin or Orban. But again, I think that's a very long shot, but it's possible. And like I said, I think the French presidency is the closest hope we have to restoring a monarchic order in Europe. And I'll leave that topic there. We spent quite a long time actually talking about this, laying this out. But this is just a thought that came to me, when. I don't know. These sort of thoughts just come to me sometimes when I see stuff about France or Andorra and see these fun facts, and I don't know. It just strikes me as funny. But in all seriousness, France, regardless of whether Macron gets reelected or somebody more sympathetic to our ideas gets elected, they are in the position right now, with the political power they hold, with the current shifting of the global order, to really again just completely shake up and shatter the current European order, for better and for worse. I think with some of the directions going, it's much better. Of course, there'll be growing pains. They'll be ripping off the Band-Aid sort of things. Again, as you said, with Brexit, and with, as I said with Brexit, but as you said with the Italian threatening to leave, it would be a painful process. But I do think that, a new order is being set forth, and Macron, if I had to summarize him, he is somebody showing that he is trying to establish a semi-liberal order to confront a multipolar world.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good summation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which we could have just saved 25 minutes talking about that. But I do think we got in the weeds a little bit. Now we do have a few other topics now. Of course, the oil wars are going on, as you said. $15, woo! Yeah, really getting up there, really winning with those oil prices. They're definitely going to be enough to sustain the oil industry in all these different countries. But from Reuters, a special report: Trump told the Saudis cut oil supplies or use U.S. military support. Now, this is from today, and this article's from today, but this information is from April 2nd, apparently, and he had been hardballing the OPEC countries, Saudi Arabia in particular, the Gulf states in particular. And this phone call came 10 days before Saudi Arabia and Russia announced their quote unquote deal. Now, a lot of people who saw the headline, again, it's that trick of you reading the headline and making all assumptions on that. Don't feel bad. We all do it. I do it. Everyone does it. But what a lot of people thought is like, oh, Trump's still the negotiator in chief. He's still Mr. Art of the Deal. Look at what he did. But then we read that, oh yeah, it happened on April 2nd and resulted in April 12th. That was before the oil crash. I don't know. It shows, I would say, a bit of impotence of U.S. policy in terms of, I don't know, have you heard any stories about U.S. cutting military aid to Saudi Arabia or decreasing its role in Yemen in any time over the past month, any time in April? I didn't. I could have missed that. I'm
No.
completely willing to admit that I may have overlooked it. If you have any information, I'd love to see it because, that'd be great for next episode. But as it stands, it seems like Trump made a threat. Saudi Arabia played along while winking. Now, not that Saudi Arabia isn't concerned about their crisis. I mean, their economy is probably one of the most oil dependent in the world. I mean, look, maybe Venezuela is more oil dependent. Maybe some of these other Gulf states are more oil dependent. But Saudi Arabia is definitely up there. It's sort of what they propagandize Russia as. Which I'm not saying Russia isn't suffering right now, but point being is, yeah. So I imagine everyone wanted to make a deal, but everyone's again they're too entrenched in their current stance for anyone to blink, and it's going to take the collapse of somebody to blink. Now, I think out of all the major oil producing countries, that being the U.S., Saudi Arabia, and Russia, I think the first to crumble would be Saudi Arabia, no doubt, especially if the war in Yemen keeps on going the direction it's going. Oh boy, I mean, like I said a few weeks ago, that would probably be the most monumental change in a century if they caved in Yemen and came home. But yeah,
Well, they've lost even more territory in Yemen.
Do tell.
Saudi Arabia is essentially losing the war in Yemen. That's the reality of it. And America's less invested, based on the last 5-6 years, is less invested in directly intervening than it is in Syria. But it is, an important strategic position around the Horn of Africa, which essentially, connects the Indian Ocean to the Red Sea to the Mediterranean. So it's not just some swath of landlocked somewhere in, let's say, Central Asia or whatever. It's important, and America can't really help more than supplying weapons. So, yeah, I mean, Trump can make that threat, but last week we saw oil go negative. Oil tankers are parked in the Pacific, amongst other places, because they can't unload. We talked about that in a previous episode about a shortage of storage facilities. And as I mentioned earlier at the top of the program, Saudi Arabia already has sent the first part of 2 shipments to the U.S. It arrived, or it was sent off, April 24th. There's another one coming May 24th. And it's in excess of 50 million barrels, which may not seem like a lot, but it's part of a contract. And, this is at a time where we're seeing a 9% drop in demand for oil, generally speaking, in the first quarter. This is at a 2012 level. April, the demand was so low, it mimicked basically the demand for oil in 1995. So yeah, it's slumping. So I mean, we're celebrating oil being traded at $15 a barrel. There's no question that the shale industry in America is going to be heavily impacted by this. From what I've read, is that they're going to open up a line of credit, and it will totally not be a bailout. But you can bet it'll be a kind of a bailout. So, you know, COVID in a way has impacted America greatly, especially when you consider 30 million people are now jobless and they'll have to be provided for. China's production is at 93% right now, so it's starting to go up and running. It's still like a tenuous situation because Japan has now said that it's going to go into a lockdown because it's afraid that the virus actually, might be resurging. They don't have a really huge death toll, neither does South Korea. But China being open, the demand for Chinese industry, for Chinese products being up 93%, at least it's shipping anyways, is a sign that the economy is slowly starting to bounce back up. And if it starts to happen in China, those who have better ties with China right now than those that don't are probably going to see through this situation better, or at least better sooner and not later. But the oil situation is still not very good. It's not really very good for anybody when it comes down to it. But again, we'll have to wait and see. The litmus, I think June is going to be like a very pivotal month to help us assess what the first half of the year was like. And then I suppose we will have to wait till September and October in the fall, especially I would say late October, to see if there is a resurgence of the virus or not. I imagine that even if there is a resurgence, that the quarantine, I think, was so painful for so many that I think a lot of, you're going to see countries that are going to just make those decisions and say, well, maybe 1 million dead isn't really that much.
One dead is tragedy. 1 million dead is a statistic.
So true.
I'm
just being realistic about this, right? Some of those countries in Europe that have socialized medicine, they can cope with this better, but America can't, because it doesn't have socialized medicine because of the extraordinary amount of money that it has with the military-industrial complex. But we've gone over this before. It's also an empire that has certain obligations. There's an entire world order that depends on America. And so I think, 2020 is going to be a very pivotal year, I think, for everybody, but I think in particular for America.
Yeah, absolutely. And we said this from our New Year's Eve, New Year's Day show, where the 2010s were awful for the American empire. We lost, again, a lot of credibility between Libya, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Ukraine, the rise of China, what have you, North Korea, which we'll also get into that. But I mean, the 2020s, we thought, 2020 is going to be pivotal. But I mean, this much, this fast, I couldn't have seen this. I thought, things will gradually decline. It'll probably be by the end of 2020s when things really start to seem like they're getting shaken up. But I figured it'd at least be post-Trump, assuming Trump got his second term and left in 2024, 2025. I figured be the second half of the decade that we'd see this. But right out of the gate, whether that be with Iran, whether that be with this virus, absolute insanity happens. And I hammer on this point again and again, time and time again. But yeah, I don't know any other way to put it beyond that. It's absolutely wild, and we'll just have to wait and see, because every week becomes crazier and crazier, and the show's going to be a 2-hour long endeavor by the end of the year. I can almost guarantee you. But I mean, beyond that, I suppose we can move on to throw more fuel on the fire. You know what two countries are feuding right now?
Well, there's several, but it surprised me.
India and Pakistan.
Oh, yes. Yes.
So this happened around last February, last March, where there was some skirmishes at the Indian-Pakistan border, specifically over Kashmir. That was right after India started to pass some laws that cracked down on terrorism, which Pakistan, of course, decried as anti-Muslim. Which, again, I don't know the specific details of the law, but this article I was reading was from a very pro-Indian news outlet, but they did make an interesting point about India and Superpower 2020. Again, yeah, still one of my favorite jokes to go on even after the fact. But they made a point that Modi is trying to centralize things. India has always been a very federalized system just because of how diverse it's been. That's been the only way it's functioned. But uh, India is trying to centralize things under a civic nationalist identity where we're all Indian, whether we're Hindu or Sikh or Muslim or Christian or Buddhist or whatever. And you can see that like with actually some of the more recent laws that got passed on Kashmir, at least according to this news article. Again, a pro-government India outlet, so take it with a grain of salt. But point being is, they are moving towards that civic identity. I do think Pakistan might be trying to play on that with some of these groups. I mean, again, when you're trying to build a civic identity like this, there's bound to be some groups that feel discontent, that think, well, we don't want to give up our identity. We don't want to be Indians in general. We want to be Kashmiri Muslims or whatever group or Sikhs in our own our own land, as it were. But point being is, Pakistan began to move its missiles towards the border. Things haven't gotten to a firefight yet. The story's from a few days ago. But again, this sort of flare up happens every few years, and it seems like it is a bit soon after the last one. The biggest one in recent history was in 1999 when it looked like they were actually going to a full scale war. Now that backed down after 3 months, and the more recent one backed down after a couple weeks. Again, like I said, no combat has broken out after this one. India, I don't even think has released an official statement on it. I imagine they've probably moved military equipment to counter it on the border, or they might not even be bothering. They might be like, "Oh, let Pakistan play its game. We feel no threat." But again, we could see maybe the month. In January we got confrontation with Iran and an economic slowdown. In February we got a virus outbreak. In March we got a complete economic halt. In April, we got the crash of oil prices and the global spread of the virus to the point it's at today. Will May add an India-Pakistan conflict to the picture?
Never say never, but I doubt it'll materialize. There might be some skirmishes at the border, but yeah. I would say this is there's a bit of a frozen conflict that just erupts every once in a while, and
they just so happen to both have nukes, which makes it scarier, but also less likely to happen.
Yes. So I doubt that we're going to see anything serious. Frankly, there's just too much to lose, and I don't think in a sense that the situation. The economic situation with COVID, has, what would either country gain? There's no real gain. It'll only create more losses. Pakistan is defeated. Pakistan is gonna pay India back. How? So it's a kind of a jostling and assertion, and I think most of it is really there to to manage each country's domestic policies more than anything else.
They can
in the same way that Saudi Arabia was saying Iran is going to take over the whole Middle East. Help us, America. 5 years ago, that they had this. They were on the verge of invading Syria. I don't know if people remembered that. They were on the border, they were amassing, and nothing materialized. And this was just a few months before Russia stepped in. In fact, maybe that's why they didn't, because Russia was about to step in. And, so I think Modi has to deal with, like, he has this kind of Hindu nationalism that's developing. I don't want to oversimplify it, but I've spoken to Indian people who are not Hindu, who are not Muslim either, but who feel that this is really alienating and it's in the wrong direction. In a sense, he's doing, what he's doing is he's looking at the bloc that he can garner the most amount of support, and that happens to be Hindu Indians, right? But that can have trouble later on, and so basically, him standing tall against Pakistan, in a sense, is there to unify all of India, because Pakistan is the greater threat. However, I'm sure there's factions of Muslim Indians who might not agree with them. Pakistan has an easier time with this because, as diverse as it is, it's not as diverse as India. It is a more homogenous population, certainly with respect to religion. And so for similar reasons, India as a threat will unify Pakistan. And so I think a lot of this is probably like a kind of over-reporting. Not that these two countries haven't clashed before. They have. There are real underlying issues. But I think at the moment, considering they've also participated in quarantine, and if people are suspect about what are the actual numbers emerging out of China, that the amount of lives that COVID has taken, I think those numbers are going to be even more obscured and unknowable coming out of India and Pakistan. So the public is being tested right now, and it's easier to divert attention this way.
Yeah, like I said, it is for political reasons to reach out to foreign powers and domestic reasons where they can bolster
Right.
internal support, saying, "Look, I'm the only one who can defend us from those savages just across the border." Which both of them have, I would say, reasonable cases to dislike each other. But one other interesting thing I want to touch on before we leave this topic is uh, Pakistan and China are in very good. China and India, not so much. Russia's on good terms with both Pakistan and India. India is being courted by the United States, especially under Trump. So it creates this interesting dynamic where, India is, on good terms with two global powers. Pakistan's on good terms with two global powers. And some of those global powers just so happen to be the same. I mean, like Russia is in, it has its, like stake in both fires where it's kind of straddling
Mm-hmm.
that line. And so I would imagine Russia especially would probably become a mediator in any conflict there would be. The United States probably. I know the United States, we've had our issues with Pakistan over the past couple years, but it's not a horrible relationship, at least not yet. So they could step in. So again, and then you also consider that India and Pakistan did joint military drills together under like several dozen nation coalition in China. So again, there's all these weird dynamics where yeah they'll play on it, but there's all these other external factors that would complicate them from actually trading blows.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's I think it's posturing. Not that horrible things don't happen there. We saw what happened last year in Kashmir. So like it's possible that something like that would flare up. And of course, I think it was in the 90s or early 80s where there was kind of like a fear that India and Pakistan might go like just sort of nuclear. Like it was touch and go, but I don't foresee it now.
And the last point I'll make on this, if we're still going to play this ridiculous game where we pretend like the UN matters and should have influence over the situation, both Pakistan and India deserve a seat on the Permanent Security Council.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, I'd prefer to do away with the whole system altogether. But if we're going to be playing this game, put the other two nuclear powers that technically aren't violating the NPT. They both built their weapons before then. Yeah, just throw them on there. Come on. But yeah, whatever. Not that I think it makes much of a difference or anything. But I was going to talk about North Korea, but I am pushing time a bit. So just a brief summary. Not much has changed. There's been reports, possibly Kim Jong Un is at his resort and just trying to get away from it. But ultimately, what I think that again, it boils down to we really don't know yet, and there's been so many like confirmations of his death and confirmation of him being alive that I wanted to touch on it, but I don't think it's worth doing an in-depth look at it for as of now.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, another rumor about North Korea surfaces. I had friends that were like adamant, like he's dead, and I'm going like, and okay, I said, well, okay, he's not, but if he was, like, that changes your life how?
Yeah, like I've laid out my scenario. If he is dead, it'll probably fall into a shaky leadership council with his sister, with the old guard there, and I imagine those two factions don't really like each other, but they'll begrudgingly cooperate because of other issues at hand until they can find a suitable successor, whether it be one of them or somebody we've never heard of.
Right, and I also think this is kind of like another diversion. Like it's this is, you know what? There's a lot of diversion stories going on this week and the tail end of last week. Uh, like I mean, it's spring, so of course that means it's North Korea season. America always has some crazy stories that always surface around spring of each year. Um, but I think it's a diversion because like Trump is in a bad position right now. CNN, of course, is autistic as ever. Uh, essentially claiming he's not really. I mean, there are people who support CNN that like literally believe Trump is killing Americans with coronavirus.
Yeah,
Like
it's the liberal boomer
that
versus conservative boomer sort of narratives going on right now. That's really what it boils down to.
yeah. So this is just a diversion story.
Uh, yeah, I tend to agree. It's just hey, look over here while we deal with this trash fire going on. This trash fire, which I will say, at least on the record, I'm not gonna play into the I'm gonna be a big brain centrist here, not play into the partisan narrative of Trump is like literally killing Americans, or it's those demon rats who are just conspiring to destroy America. Again, I think they're both buffoons as far as I'm concerned, but again, that's aside the point. But speaking of uh, just sort of the American internal politics, there's two stories I want to cover, and that is General Flynn getting off with pretty much no,
Mm-hmm.
nothing happened to him, and some of the stories with Biden. I'll start with Flynn because we have touched on him. I wouldn't say extensively, but before in the show, definitely. Now, he was Donald Trump's original national security advisor, and he served in the post for 3 weeks to a month around there when Trump was very first in office. And he laid out what I would now describe as a more pragmatic foreign policy, sort of an empire and retreat foreign policy, but still has quite a bit of weight to throw around and can still have a massive amount of influence in the world, but maybe will have to contend with some rivals. Now, I say that because he was more in favor of détente with Russia, which got him in that scenario, seeing as, his phone call with the Russian ambassador was the whole thing that sparked all this off. Some of his rhetoric that the U.S. needs to be tougher on China, tougher on Iran. We need to reorient our interests, kind of let Europe govern its own destiny. Pretty pro Zionist, which is no surprise when it comes to an American national security advisor. I mean, look, I think we all know the story there, but he seemed to lay out, even though I would still view it as wanting to maintain a liberal world order, wanting to maintain the American empire, a restructuring of it where they would cut off some of the dead weight and really shore up what is significant so we can, I guess you could say,
Hello.
live to fight another day. Yeah, but
Yeah. Go ahead.
yeah, you go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I remember early 2016, and I thought, at that time, it was actually a really, perhaps I was naive. I definitely think I got swept up, but Flynn to me represented somebody in Trump's camp that could renegotiate with Russia, essentially come to an even more pragmatic understanding of the situation, and maybe even pry Russia not a little bit away from China, so that America could get some kind of leverage. Of course, that didn't happen because the amount of investment there is to essentially, destroy Russia or to turn it into, like, I don't know, just another sort of defunct state, like, like some other, Eastern European country,
Yeah, to
like that.
return to the Yeltsin era, if
They
you will.
represent no geopolitical power at all, and then China would be dealt with mercilessly. China would have no option but to completely liberalize its markets and so on, right? So I thought maybe that you know he represented somebody who would, especially with like guys like Carter Page, who was also very sympathetic to that idea. And I was aware of Carter Page, like, honestly, before I even heard Trump was running for president. And so when I heard that he was on Trump's team, I thought, like, oh, wow, that something could develop here. But it is good to hear that. So I guess Flynn is going to be essentially exonerated.
Yeah, completely. As no
Yeah.
criminal record, anything. Now, I think any hope of him getting an administration job has been burned out over this
Yeah.
3.5 year ordeal, or however long it's been. But point being, yeah, I doubt he's returning to the White House or any other political position anytime soon. But it is interesting that, again, this whole scandal started because of the phone call of the Russian ambassador, which played into Russian collusion narrative. But honestly, what it was, in my opinion, it was the hubris of the neocons looking at somebody who said, look, I fundamentally agree with you. I can get behind a lot of what you're saying, but I think we have to be more realistic about it and cut some elements loose.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, but honestly, beyond
Except the neocons dealt with it in a kind of zero-sum game.
yeah,
Like,
early Trump, oh boy, the neocons completely like lost the
there
plot
were.
where they thought he was going to be the greatest threat ever. They made the dumbest moves, which, funny enough, became a self-fulfilling prophecy where they are in the state they are today. I'm not going to say they're completely irrelevant, completely uninfluential, but the reason they've lost so much political capital is because they freaked out because of Trump, rather than, I mean, look, they eventually ingratiated himself to him, but a lot of what they lost, a lot of the reason why Trump refrained from Syria and Iran, and the reason why relations with Russia aren't perfect but not as bad as they could be, is because the neocons blew it early.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good point. They were to me at that time, they were as vehemently opposed to Trump as the libs, essentially. That's why they sided with him. That's why you had, like, literally New York liberals, honoring the memory of John McCain. Like, this is the guy they protested against, like, just 7 or 8 years earlier.
Yeah,
It
that's why
was
Bill
it was
Kristol shows
truly
up on
astonishing.
MSNBC and whatnot.
Right. But if anything describes, like, empire and how it works, and where the directives of a empire are and what its necessities are, it's going to be like when so-called enemies are, like, an enthusiastic agreement about, like, why in this case Trump is a major threat to everybody. Of course, they used all kinds of ridiculous ideas, like he's grabbing women, y'all, like, as if, like, the other politicians don't.
Oh, that'll lead to an
So they
continue
used
though.
they used a moral argument. Yeah, I mean, they used a moral argument because the fact of the matter is they can't literally disclose to, like, the average normie why he has to be opposed, because the average normie, like, literally thinks, like, I don't know, Germany is free to really make all of its decisions, or Um, I don't know. Like it'll be one like outrageous idea after another.
Or that the Russians stormed in, massacred half Crimea, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Like so,
But yeah, they can't come out and say, "Hey, we think this guy proposing slight deviations might destroy our gay empire." Like that, they just can't come out and say that.
Right. And of course Trump appeased them. Basically, he literally hired all of them. Like he even one of the earliest hires. I don't mean to diverge here, but one of the earliest hires he had was this exec from Google who was literally working with Hillary on creating algorithms to block bad stories about her.
Yeah, and
Because
then
of course
H.R. McMaster, one of the big people behind the Iraq War, like that was his replacement for Flynn.
yeah, like it's ridiculous, right? And but in a way, Trump was still an effective monkey wrench into the whole thing, in a way, in the same way as Russia basically standing up for its interests in Crimea.
Yeah, and again, it boiled down to just Trump being there, and the idea of Trump became much more threatening than Trump himself.
Yeah.
Uh, But moving on from that, you mentioned something about moralistic arguments against politicians and how, they all do it and some may be more subtle about it than others. Should we discuss a certain story without triggering the YouTube algorithms? Now, of course, I think you know exactly what I'm referring to, and I'll let you get into some detail, but I just ask that you tread lightly.
Okay. um, Hang on. I'm still not sure exactly where you're going with this.
Well, I don't know. I thought he was one of your favorite politicians as of late. I thought you were really stumping for him there for a while in the summer. Certain presidential candidate.
You mean Zhirinovsky?
Oh yes, of
No.
course, but a certain American presidential candidate.
Oh, Biden.
Yep.
Well, yeah, Biden definitely. Yeah, yes.
Yeah, let's just say he got accused of committing a crime of a sexual nature with a woman. Now, these date back to the 90s. CNN interview and everything, which mysteriously disappeared from, all Google platforms, whether that be YouTube, whether that be the Google store, the CNN episode that was on with, whatever interviewer they had on. But, yeah, all these things, they just, mysteriously disappeared as if they never existed. And, major...
Aren't you glad you're not living in China?
I am. I'm glad that we have the political freedoms not afforded to Europeans living under hate speech laws or these Russians who get beaten by the Cossacks for daring to oppose Putin. It's like, again, it's like, I'm so glad the government can't do it and that they just outsource it to private corporations.
Yeah.
Outsourced violations of your rights, as it were. It's actually an ingenious system, but I digress.
It is. Like, I love also how like any dissent can be turned into an economy. like people just naturally figure out how in a crisis, in a kind of ideological, moral, and sociological crisis facing a country, they can so easily just turn into grifters. Buy my hoodie.
Funny enough, I was actually just thinking about how to make money off of this, which I'll discuss with you more off air. But keep your eyes open, audience. There may be some opportunities to support us soon. But continue.
Yeah. So I did read briefly about this a few days ago that he's in hot water about this, but as these things go, he'll face a kind of wrath, the sort that, well, Bill Clinton, but less, which is to say nothing. Like, obviously, I think we understand that the essential power core of the American empire is liberal, actually, and has been for a very, very long time. Even I would say prior to the '60s, but the '60s accelerated the situation. And so there won't be any kind of it'll all be within the private, So of course that means Twitter, YouTube, any channels, basically any accounts that are going to look more deeply into this. They'll be considered conspiracy theorists, that they're dividing the nation.
See,
What
we're
about
small enough to
Blum?
get away with it.
Yeah. Which is crazy because like Macron listens to us, Putin listens to us.
Yeah. Yeah, it is crazy, but we haven't infiltrated the American political establishment yet.
Not yet, not yet, but
Soon, soon.
soon. So yeah, you hear this. There's a lot of gaslighting. Trump bursts into an argument with his, one of his campaign people about his slumping approval. Like these things are always going up and down, and his general approval is like it's pretty good.
Yeah, it's middling, but it's nothing terrible.
Yeah, and like if there's a debate between Biden and Trump, I mean, I was speaking to a liberal friend of mine who has no idea about this show, however. And he's petrified. Trump is just going to chew him up and spit him out, and I think they realize that, right? So there's no answer for it. I'm not talking about, Biden, the groper from the 90s. I'm talking about Biden's chance as the next president. Yeah, there are liberals who literally would vote in, Biden's dog, but the fact of the matter is there's too many undecideds. There's people that are not that extreme on the spectrum, and they're not going to vote for him if he looks incompetent. And let's face it, not just the U.S., but the West has looked very incompetent the last 4 months. So having and of course the normies, right? So naturally they're going to think that the president has more power than he really does, and so on. So a less competent looking leader is potentially going to create a greater amount of problems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, again, a lot of people conservatives are really latching onto this. And I'm not saying, again, I haven't done too much research into these accusations against Biden. I give them more credibility than I do against the ones against Trump and Kavanaugh and a lot of the other ones we've seen in recent history. But again, the jury's still out, and I haven't done enough research, nor do I honestly care enough because, again, as you said, it's mostly, if not entirely, a dog and pony show at this point when it comes to those kind of accusations. But
I mean, for me, I think the only person of those three that you mentioned that's probably not guilty is Kavanaugh.
Yeah.
Like on some level, I have to believe that, that Trump groped women and so did Biden. Like on some level, of course they did. But I doubt Kavanaugh, especially from what I saw, especially from the testimony, the muddled stories, just ridiculous.
Yeah, I have no surprise that the multi-billion-dollar worth celebrity. He got up with some women. Maybe it wasn't entirely under the best circumstances, but again, this is getting into the weeds. It's getting kind of not to sound like too tinfoil hat, but they're getting this exactly right where they want us discussing all this, but it kind is. But the point you make is, again, it goes back to the narrative we have on Biden, where Biden is honestly almost as bad as Trump in terms of the liberal narrative because he represents that. Has the American empire become so impotent that this is their challenger to the outsider, the maverick who destroyed the system? This is the guy they want to rebuild it, a guy who can barely string together a sentence. And again, people do give a lot more credit to the power of the American presidency than it deserves. Funny enough, actually, just bring this back, the French executive actually holds quite a bit of power, and people, I don't know, they tend to think that executive offices in general are very powerful. And the United States is actually, again, a bit of bucking the trend there. Now, again, that's not to get into parliamentary systems or into any of, again, getting into the weeds again. But point being is, I don't think anything will come of this. But especially if Biden does go on some sort of interview or town hall to answer for this, they better make sure he's having a pretty good day and is coherent, because this could turn out very badly if he's not.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's going to be a potential problem. Of course, the Republicans are going to use it. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And in fact, they're not interested in resolving this soon. They would rather drag it out. So I would expect the story to kind of disappear. Then I would expect it to resurface again for the remainder of the months leading to November. And of course, there's always the October surprise, which I'm sure both sides have their own. But yeah.
Yeah, and this is after Trump. One of his things was China Joe, trying to play up Joe Biden's connection to China, like the entirety of Washington isn't in the pocket of some foreign entity, or various foreign entities, as it were. So yeah, they're really trying to play that up. And again, I give more credence to the Biden accusations, as I said, to a lot of the other ones. But again, this doesn't pan out. And I don't know, as cold as it may sound, I really do not care at this point. But I did figure it was worth mentioning, at least in brief.
Yeah, I'm in full agreement. I don't really care either way.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, as we established, the accelerationists will win either way.
Our victory is inevitable. I see nothing in the course of the last 6 months that proves otherwise.
I don't know. You thought that Macron and Trump's interactions were funny. Wait until you see Macron and Biden. Makes
awesome.
a pass at his 60-year-old wife, starts berating Macron for not agreeing with him. Yeah, but again, I'm going off on a tangent here, but yeah, as we said, either way, we win. Check and mate. I think that does it for us. Bit of an odd note to end it on, but I mean, we've done weirder, definitely.
Yes, we have. We've drifted far more than this.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even as recently as the past few episodes. But yeah, as I said, if you got any final words on any of these topics, or anything we forgot to mention before we get out of here?
Biden total victory 2020.
As I said, check and mate. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in.
Thank
See
you.
you next time, and goodbye.